You've probably heard the saying, opposites attract. But in relationships, there's a certain type of opposite that feels magnetic in a way that's hard to explain: anxious and avoidant partners. One craves closeness, the other craves space. One reaches out, the other pulls back. And yet somehow, instead of pushing each other away for good, they keep finding their way back together. It's intense, confusing, and deeply addictive. But what's really going on under the surface? Why do two people with such different needs feel such a strong pull toward each other, even when it leads to frustration? Today, I'm going to break down the 7 reasons why anxious and avoidant partners can't seem to resist this dynamic, and why understanding these reasons might just change the way you look at love forever. When two people are drawn to each other, it often has less to do with pure chance and more to do with the subconscious pull of familiarity. For someone with an anxious attachment style and someone with an avoidant attachment style, this familiarity is not just a casual feeling, it's an echo from their earliest emotional experiences. Deep down, both are often reenacting the kind of emotional environment they grew up in, even if they don't consciously recognize it. The anxious partner, who learned early on that love can feel inconsistent or conditional, feels a strange sense of comfort in the unpredictability that comes with an avoidant partner. There's a part of them that recognizes this pattern because it mirrors what they've known since childhood. For the avoidant partner, who learned that closeness can feel overwhelming or unsafe, the anxious partner's emotional intensity feels oddly familiar too. It may be frustrating at times, but it taps into the same emotional rhythm they learned to dance to when they were younger. That's why, even when the relationship feels challenging, there's a part of each person that says, "This feels like home." And because it feels like home, they mistake it for compatibility rather than realizing it's simply the comfort of a repeated pattern. The human brain is wired to prefer what it knows. Even if what it knows is unhealthy, it feels safer than the unknown. For the anxious partner, having someone who pulls away now and then can feel like an opportunity to finally fix the type of connection they've always struggled with. It's like a subconscious belief that if they can win over someone who withdraws, it will prove they are lovable once and for all. For the avoidant partner, being with someone who constantly seeks reassurance mirrors the relationships they may have had with caregivers who were demanding or emotionally overwhelming, and staying in that dynamic, even though it's uncomfortable, feels easier than navigating a relationship that demands deep vulnerability. This repetition of familiar roles means that both partners are essentially playing out the same emotional story over and over, with each other as the lead characters. It's not about logic or conscious choice, it's about an invisible script written years before they even met. The pull of familiarity is powerful because it's tied to survival wiring. Early in life, we adapt to our caregiver's emotional availability, or lack of it, as a way to secure love and attention. Those patterns sink so deeply into our nervous system that as adults, we gravitate toward relationships that allow us to keep playing the same role. An anxious person's role is to reach out, pursue, and fix. An avoidant person's role is to retreat, protect, and maintain space. Together, they lock into a dynamic that feels strangely safe because it's predictable, even though it's also frustrating. The anxious partner knows exactly what it feels like to wait for someone to come back emotionally. The avoidant partner knows exactly what it feels like to protect their independence by withdrawing. This mutual recognition, however unconscious, becomes the glue that holds them together. Even in moments of conflict or distance, the familiarity can be strangely comforting. That's why anxious and avoidant partners often struggle to walk away from each other, even after repeated cycles of the same problems. The relationship may not feel peaceful, but it feels like something they understand completely, and the human mind finds a sense of safety in what it understands. It's like returning to an old neighborhood. You might know every crack in the sidewalk, every street corner, and every shortcut, even if the neighborhood isn't particularly beautiful or safe. The familiarity makes you feel like you belong there, and that same psychology applies to why these partners are drawn together. What makes this pattern even stronger is that both people often carry the hope that this time it will be different. The anxious partner hopes the avoidant will one day stop pulling away and give them the consistent love they crave. The avoidant partner hopes the anxious will one day stop demanding so much emotional closeness and give them the peace they desire. This hope feeds the connection, making it harder to see that the real reason they're together isn't because they're perfect for each other. It's because they are perfect matches for each other's learned patterns. And so, round and round it goes, each person unknowingly drawn to the comfort of what they've always known, even if it's the very thing that keeps them from finding true emotional fulfillment. The chase and distance cycle is one of the most intoxicating and addictive patterns in relationships, especially between anxious and avoidant partners. It starts with an intense connection that feels electric, almost cinematic. The anxious partner leans in, pouring attention, affection, and energy into the bond, while the avoidant partner initially allows it, sometimes even enjoying the closeness for a while. But before long, the avoidant partner begins to feel a creeping sense of pressure, as though their independence is being quietly taken away. They start to step back, creating space and emotional distance. For the anxious partner, this sudden pullback triggers a deep fear of loss, igniting a desperate need to close the gap. And so, the chase begins, with one person pursuing and the other retreating over and over again until it becomes the very heartbeat of the relationship. This cycle doesn't just happen once, it repeats, and with each repetition, it strengthens the emotional intensity between them. For the anxious partner, the moments of closeness feel euphoric, almost like a high. It's the rush of finally feeling seen, wanted, and safe. But when that closeness is withdrawn, it's like going into emotional withdrawal, and the only way to get the high back is to chase it again. The avoidant partner, meanwhile, experiences the opposite rhythm. The more they feel chased, the more they pull away to protect themselves from what feels like emotional suffocation. But once they've created enough distance, they start to miss the warmth and validation they get from the anxious partner's attention, so they come back, sparking another round of closeness before they inevitably retreat again. The human brain is not designed to resist this kind of emotional roller coaster easily. The highs and lows release chemicals like dopamine and adrenaline, which wire the brain to associate the other person with excitement and passion. That's why, even in the middle of the frustration, both people can feel a powerful sense of chemistry. It's not just emotional, it's physiological. The unpredictability of the connection makes it even more addictive because the brain is more stimulated by intermittent rewards than consistent ones. When love feels like a prize you have to fight for, it suddenly feels more valuable, even if the cost of getting it is constant anxiety or emotional shutdown. For the anxious partner, the chase is fueled by hope and the belief that if they just love enough, give enough, or prove themselves enough, the avoidant partner will stop retreating. Every moment of reconnection after a period of distance feels like a victory, a confirmation that they've won back the love they feared losing. For the avoidant partner, the distance they create feels like survival, an act of self-preservation to keep from feeling smothered. Yet, the chase from the anxious partner can also validate them, confirming that they are desired and important, even if they resist too much closeness. This push-pull interaction creates a feedback loop that neither person fully understands in the moment, but both find incredibly hard to break. The danger of this dynamic is that it often gets mistaken for deep love or soulmate-level chemistry. The intensity of missing each other during periods of distance can be so strong that the reunion feels overwhelming in its sweetness. That temporary relief and emotional flooding make it easy to forget the discomfort that came before, and so the cycle continues. Each time it repeats, the bond feels more unbreakable, not because it's healthy, but because it's been reinforced by countless rounds of emotional highs and lows. What makes it even more compelling is that both partners, on some level, are playing out an unconscious script. The anxious person's instinct is to move toward perceived danger in relationships. Closeness feels like safety, so they chase it relentlessly. The avoidant person's instinct is to move away from perceived danger. Distance feels like safety, so they create it whenever things get too close. The irony is that the anxious partner's chase confirms the avoidant's fear that closeness will always come with demands. while the avoidance retreat confirms the anxious partner's fear that love will always be taken away. In this way, both people end up reinforcing the very fears that drive the cycle in the first place. Because the emotional chemistry in this pattern is so strong, it can convince both people that they're meant for each other. They interpret the longing, the passion, and the intensity as signs of true love, when in reality, it's the cycle itself that's creating the spark. It's like being addicted to a game you never quite win. You keep playing because the next round might be the one where you finally get it right, even though the game is designed to keep you chasing. This constant back and forth becomes the defining feature of the relationship, making it almost impossible for either partner to imagine a love that feels steady, secure, and calm. One of the most powerful forces keeping anxious and avoidant partners drawn to each other is the deep, often unspoken belief that the other person holds the key to healing old emotional wounds. For the anxious partner, the wound is usually rooted in feeling unworthy of consistent love, a fear that closeness will always be temporary and affection will always need to be earned. They carry a longing to finally meet someone who will prove that they don't have to chase to be chosen, someone who will stay no matter what. When they meet an avoidant partner, a part of them recognizes the challenge, and that challenge becomes the hope. If they can just get this person, someone who naturally pulls away, to stay and offer the closeness they crave, it will feel like rewriting their entire story, finally proving to themselves that they are worth unconditional love. Every moment the avoidant comes closer feels like progress toward that emotional victory, and every withdrawal only strengthens their determination to try harder. For the avoidant partner, the wound often comes from growing up in an environment where closeness felt unsafe, unpredictable, or overwhelming. They learn to protect themselves by shutting down emotionally or creating space before others could hurt them. Deep down, however, there is still a part of them that longs for connection and intimacy, a part that wishes they could relax into love without fear. Being with an anxious partner stirs this hidden desire because the anxious person's pursuit makes them feel wanted, valued, and significant. There's a temptation to believe that if they could just stay close without feeling trapped, they could finally experience the kind of connection they've been avoiding all their lives. Each time they manage to stay present during moments of closeness, it feels like they're taking a step toward healing that fear. But when it becomes too much, they retreat, reinforcing their old patterns. This mutual but unspoken belief that the other person can fix what's broken creates a strong emotional tether. It's not a conscious agreement. They rarely talk about it in these terms, but it's there in the way they react to each other. The anxious partner doesn't just see the avoidant as a lover. They see them as the one who might finally choose them without conditions. The avoidant partner doesn't just see the anxious person as someone who loves them. They see them as the one who might finally understand and accept their need for space without taking it as rejection. Each is looking for redemption in the other, even though neither can truly give what the other is looking for without changing their own deep-seated patterns. The reason this feels so powerful is because it plays on a core human desire, the longing to be healed in the place where we were most hurt. The anxious partner doesn't want just any secure love. They want secure love from someone who is capable of pulling away, because that's the very type of person who has always left them feeling unsafe. The avoidant partner doesn't want just any affection. They want affection that feels safe enough to stay in without feeling like they're losing themselves. And the anxious partner's constant pursuit both offers that love and challenges their limits. The relationship becomes a testing ground for whether or not their old wounds can finally be closed for good. Unfortunately, what often happens is that this desire for healing turns into a cycle of disappointment. The anxious partner believes that if they can be more understanding, patient, or loving, the avoidant will eventually stop retreating. The avoidant believes that if they can tolerate closeness a little longer each time, the anxious partner will stop pressuring them for more. But because neither has fully addressed their underlying fears and triggers, they end up playing out the same roles over and over. The anxious partner's pursuit keeps triggering the avoidant's fear of being trapped, while the avoidant's retreat keeps triggering the anxious partner's fear of abandonment. Instead of healing each other's wounds, they keep reopening them, yet the hope that next time will be different keeps them from walking away. This is why the bond between anxious and avoidant partners can feel almost impossible to break. It's not just attraction, it's the emotional weight of believing that this person is the one who can finally make things right. It's a combination of longing, hope, and unfinished business that fuels the connection far more than compatibility or shared values. Each sees the other as the missing piece, the one who can finally give them the kind of love they've always wanted but never truly had. And so they hold on, often far longer than they should, convinced that if they can just get it right with this person, they will finally be free from the wounds they've been carrying for years. The unpredictability in the dynamic between anxious and avoidant partners plays a huge role in why the connection feels so intense and difficult to let go of. Human brains are wired to respond more strongly to intermittent rewards than to consistent ones. When love, attention, and affection arrive in bursts rather than as a steady flow, it actually creates more craving, not less. For the anxious partner, this means they never quite know when they will get the closeness and reassurance they long for. Sometimes the avoidant partner is affectionate, engaged, and present, and those moments feel euphoric. Other times, the avoidant pulls back, becomes distant, or shuts down emotionally, leaving the anxious partner feeling desperate and unsettled. This unpredictability keeps them locked in because every time they do receive attention after a period of withdrawal, it feels like a rare prize they've had to fight for, and that makes it feel even more valuable. The emotional high from those moments is powerful enough to overshadow the pain of the in-between times, at least temporarily. For the avoidant partner, the unpredictability works in a different but equally compelling way. They know that when they create distance, the anxious partner will pursue them, and that pursuit brings validation. It reassures them that they are wanted and that their value is being confirmed without having to be constantly vulnerable. Yet there are also times when the anxious partner, exhausted from chasing, will pull back themselves. In those moments, the avoidant may feel a flicker of fear that the connection could slip away, and they re-engage just enough to restore the bond. This back and forth creates a cycle where neither person is fully secure, but both are emotionally invested in seeing what will happen next. The unpredictability becomes the glue, creating a kind of emotional gambling that neither wants to walk away from. In psychological terms, this is similar to a variable reward system, the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. You pull the lever over and over because you don't know when the reward will come, but when it does, it's thrilling. In the anxious avoidant relationship, each moment of warmth, connection, and affection becomes that jackpot. The anxious partner learns to wait, hope, and work for those moments, while the avoidant partner learns that they can give just enough to keep the relationship going without having to face their deepest fears about intimacy. The unpredictability keeps the emotional stakes high, which makes the connection feel exciting, even if it's also exhausting. What makes this even more complicated is that both people often confuse this heightened emotional intensity with real love. They tell themselves that the rush of relief and joy they feel after a period of distance means the relationship is deep and meaningful. They may even believe that because the highs are so high, it's worth enduring the lows. This belief keeps them committed to the cycle, even when it's damaging to their emotional well-being. The unpredictability also fuels fantasies about the future. Thoughts like, if we can get through this rough patch, we'll be stronger than ever, or one day we'll figure out how to make it consistent. These hopes are enough to keep both partners from stepping away, because they keep chasing the idea that the next high will be the one that finally lasts. Another factor that makes unpredictability so powerful is the way it intensifies memory. The human mind tends to fixate on standout moments, and in an anxious avoidant relationship, those standout moments are often the bursts of connection after periods of tension. The brain clings to these memories as proof that the relationship has something special, conveniently downplaying the long stretches of conflict or disconnection in between. The anxious partner remembers the night when the avoidant opened up and shared something deeply personal, using it as a reason to believe closeness is possible. The avoidant partner remembers the time the anxious person gave them space without pressure, using it as proof that maybe things can feel balanced. These selective memories keep both partners hopeful and engaged, even when the day-to-day reality tells a different story. Because the pattern of unpredictability is so deeply tied to emotional chemistry, it's not easy to break. The very uncertainty that causes so much distress is also what keeps the relationship feeling alive. The idea that at any moment the dynamic could shift into closeness again keeps both partners emotionally hooked. For the anxious person, that possibility feels worth the wait and the pain. For the avoidant person, it feels worth giving just enough to keep that door open. And so, without realizing it, both become trapped in a loop where unpredictability is not just a feature of the relationship, it's the very thing that sustains it. They mirror each other's fears in a way that keeps both emotionally hooked, almost like they are looking into a reflection of their own insecurities, but through a completely different lens. The anxious partner's greatest fear is abandonment, the belief that no matter how much they give or how hard they try, love will eventually be withdrawn. The avoidant partner's greatest fear is engulfment, the belief that getting too close will mean losing their independence or being consumed by someone else's needs. When they come together, these fears lock into place perfectly. The anxious partner's constant pursuit of closeness confirms the avoidant's belief that intimacy comes with pressure and demands. The avoidant's tendency to withdraw confirms the anxious partner's belief that love is always in danger of slipping away. In this way, they keep proving each other's fears right, even while desperately wanting the opposite outcome. The mirroring of fears creates a kind of emotional resonance that is both magnetic and destructive. Each person recognizes, on some subconscious level, that the other reacts to love and vulnerability in a way that feels strangely familiar. For the anxious partner, the avoidant's emotional distance feels like every moment in their past when someone they cared about became unavailable or inconsistent. For the avoidant partner, the anxious person's intense need for reassurance feels like every experience they've had of someone crossing their boundaries or trying to control their emotional space. This familiarity doesn't just draw them in, it convinces them that they understand each other, even if what they actually understand is the shared experience of being triggered. What makes this dynamic so compelling is that both people feel like they are trying to protect themselves while also trying to get closer to the other. The anxious partner believes that if they can just soothe the avoidant's fears and show them that closeness is safe, they will finally get the security they crave. The avoidant partner believes that if they can just calm the anxious person's demands without losing themselves, they can enjoy a connection without the threat of being overwhelmed. Yet every time they act on these beliefs, they inadvertently trigger the other's core wound. The anxious person's attempts to get closer make the avoidant feel trapped, and the avoidant's attempts to create space make the anxious feel abandoned. Instead of breaking the cycle, their efforts deepen it. This mirroring effect also has a strange way of making them feel bonded through their struggles. Because both are navigating the same cycle of fear and reaction, they develop an unspoken understanding of each other's pain. The anxious partner knows what it's like to feel unsafe in love, and the avoidant partner knows what it's like to feel unsafe in closeness. Even though their definitions of safety are completely different, they see the other person's struggle as real and significant. This mutual recognition creates empathy, but it's empathy wrapped in dysfunction. They may tell themselves that no one else could understand them the way this person does, not realizing that what they're really sharing is a pattern of mutual triggering. The more this cycle repeats, the more entrenched it becomes. Each time the anxious partner's fears are confirmed, they double down on their efforts to hold on. Each time the avoidant partner's fears are confirmed, they double down on their efforts to pull away. In doing so, they keep handing each other evidence that their core beliefs about love and relationships are correct. It becomes a closed system where neither person gets what they want, but both feel unable to leave because the connection feels so charged and significant. There's an addictive quality to the way their fears and hopes feed into each other, creating a sense of urgency and importance that can make other relationships seem dull by comparison. Part of the reason this is so hard to break is that these mirrored fears give the illusion of destiny. It can feel like they were meant to meet, as if they've found someone who understands the most hidden parts of themselves. But the truth is that they are not healing each other's wounds. they are keeping them alive. The anxious partner isn't erasing their fear of abandonment by being with the avoidant. They're living it out in real time. The avoidant partner isn't dissolving their fear of engulfment by being with the anxious. They're reinforcing it with every interaction. And yet, the emotional charge of seeing their deepest fears mirrored back to them keeps them engaged, as though the next round of the cycle might be the one where everything changes. This hope, combined with the magnetic pull of familiarity, is what makes walking away feel almost impossible for both of them. The fantasy of finally winning the other person's love is one of the most powerful forces keeping anxious and avoidant partners locked in their dynamic. For the anxious partner, this fantasy is rooted in the deep belief that if they can just get the avoidant to stay close, to stop pulling away, and to love them with the same consistency they crave, it will prove their worth once and for all. Every small sign of progress, a slightly longer hug, a more open conversation, a rare moment of vulnerability, feels like a step closer to achieving that ultimate victory. It becomes less about simply being in a relationship and more about conquering what has always felt impossible. The idea that they could turn someone who fears intimacy into someone who chooses them freely feels like the emotional equivalent of finding a rare treasure, and that promise is intoxicating enough to make them endure long stretches of uncertainty and pain in the hope of reaching it. For the avoidant partner, the fantasy operates differently, but with the same emotional pull. Their version is about believing they can have love on their own terms, connection without losing independence, closeness without the suffocating weight of constant demands. They imagine that if they can get the anxious partner to relax, trust them, and stop needing so much reassurance, they can finally enjoy intimacy without fear. Every time the anxious partner manages to give them space without panicking, it feels like a sign that the relationship might be able to exist in the perfect balance they envision. For them, the fantasy is about taming the chaos they associate with closeness while still keeping the warmth and passion of being desired. This shared fantasy keeps both partners invested far longer than logic would dictate. It acts like an emotional contract, silently agreed upon but never spoken aloud. The anxious partner believes the avoidant will eventually give them the unwavering love they crave, and the avoidant partner believes the anxious will eventually stop overwhelming them. Neither sees that these fantasies require the other person to fundamentally change who they are without doing the deep internal work needed to shift their patterns. Instead, they both live in the constant tension between who their partner is now and who they hope their partner will become. The fantasy is fed by small victories, those fleeting moments when it feels like things are moving in the right direction. The anxious partner treasures every instance where the avoidant stays close in a moment they would normally withdraw. The avoidant partner treasures every moment when the anxious gives them breathing room without escalating into conflict. These moments are rare enough to feel significant and special, and they serve as proof that the fantasy might one day become reality. It's not just hope. It's selective evidence gathering where each person clings to the signs that confirm their dream and ignores the signs that contradict it. Part of what makes this fantasy so enduring is the way it blends hope with identity. The anxious partner often sees themselves as someone who can love deeply enough to change another person's fear of closeness. The avoidant partner often sees themselves as someone who can remain independent while still being in love, proving they don't have to sacrifice who they are to connect with someone. These self-images are deeply tied to their sense of worth, so letting go of the fantasy feels like letting go of a piece of themselves. As a result, they become more committed to proving the fantasy right, even when the reality of the relationship tells a different story. This pursuit of the fantasy creates an ongoing cycle of effort, disappointment, and renewed determination. The anxious partner pushes for closeness, feels rejected when the avoidant pulls away, but recommits after any moment of connection that feels promising. The avoidant partner withdraws when things feel too intense, feels a pull to return when they sense the anxious person's distance, and then recommits when the anxious gives them temporary space. Each return, each small moment of alignment reinforces the belief that the dream is still within reach. It becomes a constant game of almost getting there, which can be even more addictive than actually arriving, because the anticipation itself becomes part of the thrill. Because the fantasy is built on potential rather than reality, it can survive almost anything. No matter how many cycles of conflict and distance they go through, both partners find ways to believe that the next time will be different, that the next step will be the one that finally changes everything. This hope keeps them holding on, even when the relationship is draining them emotionally. It's not just about love, it's about the promise of redemption, the idea that if they can win with this person, they will have finally rewritten their own story about love, safety, and worth. And in the grip of that belief, they continue to invest, waiting for the day when the dream finally becomes real.